the Team Performance Podcast with Spencer Horn and Christian Napier. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Team Performance Winning Ways for Uncertain Times podcast. I'm Christian Napier, and today I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by the man in a beautiful, what is that kind of shirt? It's like a hot pink almost, it looks like here on this screen. I don't know what the color is, but you've got this lavender backdrop. You got the royal purple in the background. Spencer Horn, the brains of the operation. Spencer, how are you?
Thank you, Christian. Good to be with you. Yeah, this is kind of a salmon color, I think. This is, my wife picks out colors for me, and it's always the shirts and the ties that she picks that people notice. And so I always allow her to pick those. So it's great to see you, man in black. You just kind of remind me of Ring of Fire, down into that Ring of Fire.
Yeah, pull a little Johnny Cash out, huh?
Yeah, Johnny Cash. That's what I'm. The vibe I'm getting today from you.
Well, if I could sing half as well and perform half as well as Johnny Cash, I would consider myself truly blessed. What have you been up to lately here, Spencer? You've got this new decoration, these lights. Tell us about these lights behind you.
So we got to up the game. We're doing lots of virtual training and virtual keynotes, and so we just have some LED lights in the office, and just making it look a little more interesting. And you don't want to have too many distractions when people are joining you online. You want them to focus on you, but at the same time, you want some nice visuals.
Well, you've got a great space there to work in, and I definitely need to up my game here. We'll see if I can do that. But speaking of upping our game, we've got a great guest. Why don't you introduce our guest that we have today?
So excited to share with you our guest today, Thiago Ayres, and he's coming to us from, Curitiba, Brazil. And I want him to talk a little bit about that. And Thiago is amazing. I mean, he has, we met several years ago at a leadership cohort that he was participating in. He's somebody that does lots of leadership training himself, and he's an investor. I'm going to share with you a little bit about his bio, but he's a consultant in business management, strategy, and innovation, and an educator in the national and international MBAs. He's teaching college with all his leadership experience. What a great combination! And he's also an angel investor of up to 20 plus startups, and a business advisor, a mentor, a global speaker on governance, management, entrepreneurship, innovation, leadership. And he's done this in over 20 countries. We actually had the opportunity to share the stage together in the Dominican Republic one time, where I got to see your beautiful wife and son, and he heads the 2B solution partner at Consigliere Consulting, and he's a director of the CWB Angels, advisor, consultant, investor. The guy, he's doing it all. And he's done this on 3 continents, and he helps corporations and governments start up in their strategic, deal with their strategic challenges, no matter what size or segment that the industry is in. And so, Thiago, welcome. Good to have you.
So happy to be here, guys. Spencer, thank you. Christian, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. It's really an honor. We have been talking about doing this for a while now, and we've met, I think, the past five times in 5 different countries. And we finally, made the time to make it happen. So I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, so happy to have you. And it was so cool. We were talking about this format that we're doing, video and podcasting. It's a little old school. You invited me on your Instagram Live, and it was amazing. You had people from all over the world that were asking questions and chiming in. It was a lot of fun. Maybe one of these days, Christian, we'll catch up to what Thiago's doing with the technology.
Yeah, one of these days. One of these days.
So one of the things I'd love you to start off with, Thiago, just, we've got listeners around the world, and just tell us a little bit about, Curitiba, where you're from, what it's like, how COVID has impacted you and your community. How's that compared to, maybe Sao Paulo or other places in Brazil?
All right. So I'm originally born and raised in Rio. I'm sure some of you might have heard of. But I've moved down south. Now I live in Curitiba, which is a little bit further down south. It's in the same state that does, borders with Uruguay, Argentina, and Paraguay. Actually, not Uruguay, but Paraguay and Argentina. So where the falls are, the big Iguazu Falls. So it's in the same state where I'm at right now. Curitiba is the capital. So I've been here for a little bit over 10 years. It's been great. Life has been treating me fine. We are going through some tough times as far as, fighting the pandemic on a national scale. And, the whole crisis on the healthcare system, the political aspects of it, and the whole financial crisis that, that follows one event like this. So it's been on one side, tough times for the economy, a lot of people suffering, a lot of companies closing their doors. And on the other side, a lot of people looking at the opportunities that come with it, repositioning themselves and reinventing themselves, try to, go ahead with their entrepreneurship plans. And so this is the crazy times that we're living in, man. So it is different from living in Rio and Sao Paulo, for example. Curitiba is not like a major hub. I'd say we have around 2 million people, which differs a lot from Sao Paulo and Rio with, 20 plus million citizens. So it is a more laid back a place. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar. Brazil has colonization influences from a lot of different nations. And this area where I'm at right now has a strong influence from the Polish, the Italian, the Dutch, and the German that came here after the war, during the war times, the second war, and the Japanese too. So a lot of that cultural influence affected the way that the local culture developed. So within Brazil, we have at least 5 different Brazils. So this is where I live right now.
The Team Performance Podcast.
It's such an enormous country. And, Christian, you've done a lot of work down there. I'd love to hear from you. But for those of you who've ever seen the movie The Mission, which is a great movie with Robert De Niro, Jeremy Irons, I always envision, Iguazu Falls were those early, Jesuit missionaries going to the natives there. They would actually be taken and sent down over those falls. And so that was early on. There was a lot of Portuguese influence in that region, I imagine.
Yep.
Well, I have to say, when I was working down in Rio, just before the Pan American Games, which were in the winter in Brazil, summer here in the States, I took my family down to Brazil, down to Rio, and we did go to Foz do Iguaçu, the Iguazu Falls, and we flew through Curitiba. And that was the only time that I went through Curitiba airport. But the falls are absolutely breathtaking to see in person. They are amazing. And my wife actually got quite emotional when she saw those falls there in Iguazu. So actually, it's just a absolutely amazing, hard to describe in words. It's just absolutely amazing place.
It's humbling, right? When you face all that immensity, then you put yourself in perspective. Then you're like, well, somebody had to create this amazing stuff. They actually listed it as one of the 7 natural wonders of the world or something like that. So it is beautiful. I love going down there. It's been a while.
So let's transition into talking about more of what's going on today. The new normal, Thiago, is something we hear over and over and over again. And you talk about helping companies, and some of them are pivoting and having success. What are you seeing with the companies that you're working with, that you're helping that's working? What's in terms of strategy, in terms of how their teams are working? What are you seeing that's working right now with your clients that you're working with?
Well, first of all, let me step into the subject with all the precautions, because every time we talk about the future, mankind has been wrong 100% of the times that we try to forecast what was going to happen, right? So as somebody who works with innovation and with future, it is very important that, we put some dots in the I's and we say that nobody knows anything at this point, right? We're just at the beginning. We have not only the huge impact of COVID, but also all the subsequent crises that came after it. And all of that is combinating with all the previous changes that we were already undertaking the past 10, 20 years. So all of the social, educational, and business transformations that the world was going through, they were all accelerated, I think, by this huge black swan that we got this year. So I think I don't want to sound arrogant, and I want to be 100% honest with you guys that we're only trying to, read some signs. So nobody has a formula. Nobody knows where we're going. It's about, keep reading the signs and keep reading the scenario and then adjusting and pivoting. But as far as what companies are doing, it really depends. I have a very, what could you say, a client base that is homogeneous, which means I have clients in different segments, different sizes. Some of them are in government, some of them are small startups, some of them are big corporates. So it really depends what kind of game you're playing to actually drill down to a specific set of solutions. So my first answer to you would be, it depends. Of course, it depends, but it depends on why. I'd say the big corporate guys, they are playing safe. They are worried about, maintaining operations, raising efficiency. So a lot of layoffs we are seeing, a lot of people being, dismissed, and they are taking the necessary precautions to at least keep the operation running. It also really depends on which kind of segment we're talking about. So if we're talking about, for example, the agro industry, the agricultural business, it is booming. It hasn't been that strong for the last, 5 years at least, because we got to keep, feeding the world and feeding Brazil and feeding the other countries. So that segment is really hot. On the other hand, goods and services related to the everyday life, they are really struggling, man. So those big companies that are working, the efficiency game to, at least try to get them by. I'd say the small, more agile companies, usually more young companies, the startups and the micro businesses, they are either dying or pivoting strong. So for whoever was working on, let's say, retail, especially the offline retail, took a huge hit. Of course, we are under social isolation protocols in most of the cities in Brazil, and I believe still most of the cities in the world. So that puts a strain, on shopping centers, on malls, and whoever has a physical store. So these guys are either closing doors. We have around over 600,000 businesses that have declared bankruptcy and closed their doors in the past months.
Goodness.
Yes.
Thiago, what's unemployment? Do you have do you know what some of the figures are? I'm sure it varies regionally, but as a whole, what are you seeing?
Yeah, not only it varies regionally, but we have a huge chunk of the economy that we call it the informal economy. Those micro self-employed professionals who don't make up to the numbers.
Even Uber drivers or things like that, and.
Exactly. So people are talking anywhere between 12 and 20% employment, depending on how official or how comprehensive you get the numbers. But, and it's not only unemployment, man. Debt is going up. We have huge inequalities. That's a characteristic of our country. We are strongly unequal. And what we are seeing with this, the depression, the financial depression that is coming after COVID, is the inequalities, they are deepening. So the rich are becoming wealthier and the poor are becoming, more miserable. For example, how do you ask a family to, maintain basic hygiene habits or stay home if they have like 8 or 9 mouths to feed in one small space to live? They cannot isolate. They cannot enjoy the luxury of not going to work. So these people are taking the bus every day, and they are under risk. So we are seeing a very sad situation, I think, economically, with all the unemployment and debt and that kind of stuff. So going back to the companies, just to close the thought. And the startups, I would say, I talked about the corporate sector and offline retail, and the startups that usually are based on technology are a little bit more digital oriented. And it's easier for them, because they're small and so flexible, it's easier for them to pivot, to completely redesign the way they do business and their business model and their product, etc. Those guys are trying to find the opportunities. Because, in every crisis, there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of opportunity too. Those guys are in a unique, special position to, adjust themselves to the new opportunities of the market. So, for example, a lot of people for the first time are experiencing online shopping, ordering online food, enjoying online education. A huge chunk of the population was forced to get into this world that they didn't know. That represents a massive chunk of, no potential customers for digital businesses. So I would say, in a macro glance, those are the companies who are best positioned to, profit or reposition themselves to take the opportunities of what's going on right now.
The Team Performance Podcast. I have a question here, Thiago. If you take that kind of a smaller, more dynamic, more digital industry segment, there are still some that fail and some that are able to pivot successfully. In your view, what makes the difference? What is it that allows company A within the same segment? What allows company A to be able to pivot successfully while company B is not able to do so? What is it, or what are the factors that contribute to an organization being able to pivot successfully?
That's a great question. I don't think that there's like a formula or anything, but there are definitely some factors that we could try to point out. I'd say one of the things that we see most of the companies that succeed to pivot in a profitable manner, I'd say they were moving from day one. So let's say when COVID really transformed itself from something very far away in the other side of the world to a really real and present crisis, those companies already, they got together their leaders and they started discussing scenarios, plans, what we're going to do way before the lockdown and way before the pandemic hit our country. We already were seeing what was going on in other countries. So it looks to me that the first trait of these successful companies are they're watching closely the movements of the world and they got prepared early. Second, I think they got their finances in order, because in times like these, of course, sales are going to go down and customer behaviors are going to change. So they try to make, enough cash flow to survive on tough times, let's say 6-12 months. Third of all, I'd say they've done what they could to make sure their workforce was both safe and productive. So they took care of all the necessary variables to make sure that home office was not going to be something done on an emergency basis, but with at least a little bit of planning, with the right infrastructure, that everybody had their connection, that they trained the methods, what were going to be the new systems that we're going to work on. So I think that got them working productively on a 100% remote work basis way better. And I'd say the fifth trait or the fifth factor that I would point out, these guys are monitoring closely their customer, and maintaining a close communication with them, being transparent and trying to map what are the behavioral changes of their customers. Are the customers going to, need more attention? Are they going to need new products and services? Are there new pains or opportunities that we can help them with? And I think that's something that I've seen in most of the startups that had successful pivots. They were actually listening the customers and their requests and their needs during these tough times. So listening and adapting rapidly, I think it would be the fifth factor that I would say.
Does
that make sense?
Great observations, and love those. One of the things I really wanted to ask you and have you talk about, Thiago, was, you talked about these companies that pivoted 100% remote. I want to hear from you about how you think that's going to happen going forward. Is that a trend that is going to increase or continue? And what's the impact of that? What are you seeing is happening in terms of productivity, in terms of how we're managing? You talk about listening to customers. What about listening to our employees, what they need, what they want, what those trends are? What are you seeing in that space?
Love the question. I would say, yes, it's definitely a trend. It's important to say that, the remote work, it's not something new. We as a world have been doing it strongly for the past 10, 20 years. I remember 12 years ago, I used to be part of a team on a multinational that was a global team, which by the time it already wasn't something new or unheard of. IBM was already working like that since 20 years ago, and most of the big companies, ExxonMobil, HSBC, they have corporate bases all over the world, and they run 24/7. They had this follow the sun model, which means at least 8 hours of the day, one of the countries, they take charge of the operation and they keep the IT systems running, etc. So it's not something new, but it definitely was a revolution this year when we had to forcibly move to this remote work setting or this remote work situation, and the volume that it took place. So the number of people that wasn't used to that kind of work that moved on a forced emergency way to remote work was something very different. So I definitely see a trend there. I think it's one of the changes that are not going to be undone. A lot of people are asking, when is the crisis going to be over? When things are going to go back to normal? There's no normal to go back to. The B scenario is not anything like it was before the pandemic, right? So that's one of the things that I think once you see it, you cannot unsee it. So definitely is a trend. In the other hand, I don't buy the frenzy that says we are going to be 100% digital from now on. I believe in a hybrid comeback, because now after, 90, 120 days of 100% remote work, the world is finally realizing that we do have some pros as far as productivity, as far as, avoiding commute and a lot of the downside of the physical going to work.
But what's the cost? What's the challenge?
Perfect. We are seeing the challenge. Once our work lives with you, how do you separate that from your personal life, from your chores and your responsibilities as a father, as a husband, and all the other stuff that you do, because now you actually live with your work. So that is one of the challenges that we are seeing in research that are popping up. And also the cost of reduced interaction between the colleague peers. Because, interaction, it sparks innovation, it sparks multiple points of view, the positive conflict that comes with a lot of different minds coming together to solve a problem. It is harder, or at least it is different from what we are used to.
The Team Performance Podcast.
It takes more energy to do it remotely like this. It still can be done, but it takes more energy. And so I want you to talk a little bit about this. We are social creatures. We need social interaction. And, certainly this digital is a substitute, and it helps, so we don't have no interaction. But, I like the hybrid idea because, I have a client that they do, it's all digital marketing and media, and they have operations in India and Romania, but they have people work remotely and they come into the office once a week, every month. So 1 week per month, so that they can have that interaction. And they did that before COVID. And I just think it's so important for the cohesion of that team that you see each other's eyeballs from time to time.
Yep. Definitely. I was pulling up some, as we were speaking, I was pulling up some research that I was reading just yesterday. There's a great article at MIT Tech Review talking about, the pros and the cons, and is the remote work here to stay? We've seen a lot of companies come public and say, that the remote work was now a central piece and was going to stay forever. Right. Facebook has shared, a huge plan that could change the way we do business in the Silicon Valley, with all the concentration that we used to have on that geography. That is about to change, being Facebook one of the top hires in the area. So all of the commuting, all of the high costs of living in the huge tech centers, that's going to change. However, there's another research that was published in a portal called Visual Capitalist that interviewed over 400 startup founders, and I think it was in the UK. And they've listed the 3 top pros of remote work and the 3 top downs of remote work. In the pros, they mention the flexibility, time with the family, and life-work balance. In second, avoiding traffic. As you know, it's a major issue for most big cities in the world. And increased focus, productivity, and time management. Those are the pros. Talking about the freedom and the trust that you can work and live with your family and, manage that yourself. In the other hand, the 3 topics that appear in that research as the most important cons were less spontaneity in interactions, so less interactions with colleagues, less co-creation due to that, the lack of separation between personal life and work, and the drop in quality and the capacity of producing a high quality work. So it is definitely a challenge. It's important to remember, right, guys, that remote work is not binary, right? There's multiple levels of what you can do. I love the hybrid model that you mentioned. A lot of companies were doing that before, right? Joining once or a couple of times a week to discuss specific problems or projects. And then besides that, everybody does whatever they do in their own time and, fill out their responsibilities, right?
But that 1 week they have everybody come so that they have that time to rub shoulders. So that's the 1 week that's mandated. The rest of the time they can work wherever they want. Christian, I know you got lots of thoughts. I've been monopolizing him. Sorry.
You're not monopolizing at all. It just makes me think, Thiago, as you're talking about this, one of the hybrid solutions that I'm seeing right now is with the International Olympic Committee, but it's not driven by cost. It's driven by safety. Because they don't want to have so many people in the office at the same time, they're limiting the number of people who can be in the office at any given point in time. And so the departments basically have signups. Okay, who's going to go in on this day, that day, the other day? And they try to coordinate. It's still something that's imperfect. They're trying to work it out. And I think what we're going to see in the next few weeks and months, maybe even the next year or so, people experimenting with a variety of ways to implement this hybrid model.
For sure. Well, definitely the in-office work is going down, and it's going to be reduced. We have been seeing most of the big companies already, returning their office lease or selling the buildings or vacating the offices because they're sure at least they're not going to use 100% as they were using it before. But you're absolutely right. Everybody's experimenting. Nobody knows the formula. I think it's a very intimate equation for each company, depending on the culture that they have developed. If they already were trying some remote work before, how is that? And I love to talk about that because I know Spencer's experience on leadership. So how does the leadership, the relationships they were established, how much trust is there between the teams, to work remotely and sometimes unsynced? So I don't feel there's a one size fits all approach, but everybody's experimenting. But I do believe that most of the companies will try to keep at least partially, the human interaction. That's going to be a challenge for leadership because, how do you deal with part of your team coming to work, part not coming, or whenever they're coming, it's not on the same day. And, who gets the most opportunities because you get seen more often because you're coming to the office and the other guys is, they're in other cities. In the other hand, for the worker, it gives you the opportunity to, to move to a smaller town with your family, have more quality of life, and pay less in rent. So maybe it's going to drive a little bit more productivity as far as avoiding commute, and maybe even less cheaper salaries, because now you don't have to pay to that, for that expensive cost of living, huge tech hubs. So a lot of changes that we'll see in the following years, and I do believe you're right in that's not going to go away soon, but we're still going to experiment for a long time, I believe.
The Team Performance Podcast.
What is your experience personally about, well, let's talk about mental health for just a moment. With all this change that's happening and basically social distancing, working remotely, how is this impacting us emotionally, mental well-being? Because that will have an impact on our work, right? You said that some of the research said that we have more flexibility, we have more life balance. Christian and I have been talking about this for weeks. We actually find that we're working more hours now. Even though we don't have the commute, that is not gone into gains of time with family. It's a lot of us are attempting to make up some of the loss of the business. And so we're actually working longer hours and using that time to work. And so we're actually burning out. We're not having those social connections. A lot of people are feeling down and dragged and hopeless, and happiness. We've talked a lot about that. It seems to be at an all-time low worldwide and in the United States. What are you experiencing?
Well, no question about it. First of all, this finding that you just mentioned, it is. I also saw it on the MIT Tech Review article that says that we are saving hours, but by not commuting. But we are not dedicating those to our health and well-being and families. We are trying to make up for the lost time. And it's an infinite run. It never finishes. So it is driving us crazy. So as far as mental health, I have been paying way more close attention to that in the last 4 to 5 years. I started, researching for myself and discovered a huge universe of, mental health and wellness, etc. And what was amazing about it is that we were already witnessing a pandemic, a health crisis regarding anxiety and depression. The World Health Organization puts at around 30% of the world population suffering either from anxiety or depression. That's 1/3 of the world. That's over 2 billion people. That's before the pandemic. In Brazil, numbers who are very sketchy, because it's a subjective matter, it's hard to map, etc. But rough numbers talk about doubling that rate of, cases. So we would say Brazil has around a little bit over 200 million people. I would say easily at least 60 to 80, maybe to 100 million are experiencing some level either of anxiety or depression. So it is hurting us all over the world strongly. And what's most sad about it? The business world has not paid enough attention to it before. So now I think we're suffering the loss because, in your formal education, have you had in school any subject teaching you how to be mentally healthy? That's so important, and for some reason we don't teach the kids that.
No, I have a master's in economics. It's all about utility and productivity and marginal.
But that's connected, right?
It is connected. You're absolutely right, and I want to talk about that. But I want to pivot for just a sec about mental health because I know you love life, and I know that's one of the ways that you deal with when you travel. You take your beautiful family with you. I'm surprised that you don't have a drink in front of you because you like to have good drink and good food. And Christian and I, we love good food, right, Christian? And you love muscle cars, so you do have a way to kind of unwind and just blow off steam. How do you do that? Share with us some of the things that you do.
Oh, brother, let me be fully honest with you. I'm not immune to it. I do have my hobbies. I do have my outlook in life. I'm a young guy. I've learned from, a lot of guys that came before me, but I don't consider myself like I found the way to be immune. It is hurting me too. I have found myself and, under a little bit of stress, worrying about the future, because it's not only remote work and it's not only social isolation. The whole context of the situation, the sad things that we're seeing, the people that we're losing, friends and parents of friends dying.
Lack of control.
The lack of control, the sense of, not having the power, it really takes a toll on all of us. So what I've been trying is, besides the hobbies, besides gastronomy, besides foods and drinks, I'm trying to stay close to the family. So considering I can't be physically close, I try to bridge the gap with technology. So I have family all over the world, including the US and a lot of cities in Brazil. I try to stay close to them. I try to maintain my time with the family, really quality time, so whenever I'm with them, no cell phone, just be 100% present. I do a little bit of meditation, which, helps me, as you said, unwind a little bit. And I've kept my physical exercise, I wouldn't say in the same pace or the same rhythm, but at least a constant, at least 3 to 4 times a week. I do my in-home training, with the help of the guys at my gym. And I've bought a bunch of equipment, and that helps a lot. Not only your machine, your enzymes and hormones and your mood and etc., but also mentally, because when you're fully dedicated to, doing your exercise, you're working the brains. So it's not, a fatal formula like, I found the recipe, but I've been seeing that has been working to a lot of people, paying attention to your hobbies and your family, paying attention to your body, the way you eat, the way you sleep, and maintaining hope. I think if you have a faith, dedicate time to your faith, and usually those things together, they bring a combination who help us get us through, I guess.
The Team Performance Podcast. Well, I really appreciate you mentioning that, Thiago, because for those of us who are directly impacted by COVID professionally, and we are looking to pivot in order to survive economically, we have to understand that pivoting takes a tremendous amount of energy and time. It's not like you just say, oh, I'm going to pivot, and then it just magically happens. You have to put in a huge amount of work. And that's why Spencer and I are working more now than we used to, because we have to spend so much time trying to pivot to this new reality. And these things that you're talking about help refuel us so that we have the energy that we need to go ahead and implement this pivot. But I got to come back to the food thing, because Brazilian food is wonderful. I love me a good Brazilian chicken stroganoff, I have to say. What are the churrascarias doing in COVID? I mean, how do you operate a churrascaria that's got a buffet style, plus bringing food to your table? How does a churrascaria operate during COVID?
Well, I'd say, any restaurant, any in-person dining place was hit tremendously during this crisis. Most of the cities in Brazil, they are under either lockdown or severe isolation policies, which include mandatory closing of restaurants. So I'd say the restaurants that were operating offline, in-person dining, that didn't have any, delivery channels or anything like that, they were the most hurt, because as yourself and Spencer, they had to invest tremendous amount of energy, time, and money to reinvent themselves and create those alternate channels. Restaurants that were already putting a foot, on the delivery channels, on the takeouts, and etc., it was a little bit easier. And I'd say in the other side of the spectrum, we have those restaurants that we call the dark kitchens, the restaurants that open just for deliveries and takeout. They are only kitchens. They don't have tables that you can sit, They are operating 100% on takeouts. And those guys take huge profit of the digital revolution that was already in way. So platforms like Grubster and iFood and etc. were already a huge thing before the pandemic. So it really depends. So specifically talking about the churrascarias, the steakhouses, where you go and people go around you with the meat and etc. Those guys are mostly closed down, and they're either delivering or they're also selling related experiences. What do I say? What do I mean by that? If you have a barbecue house, you are now offering barbecue courses, or selling equipment for people to do their barbecue at home. The barbecue is a really institution in Brazilian culture. All right, so a lot of people do it at home. They have a barbecue or a grill at home. So if you were a steakhouse place, now you can offer not only the food but related experiences. So, for example, courses, or you can be the preferred sourcing for your customers' meat. So instead of him coming in to enjoy a meal, he buys the meat from you, because he recognizes your quality, and he grills it at home. So there's all this kind of options to pivot.
There's this great place, Christian, in Philadelphia. Sorry, I know you had a thought, but it's called Cook, and you can go. They have 16 seats around a kitchen, and you pay. I mean, it's like $300. It's a big deal. But they bring in these great chefs, and they cook for you. And so obviously you can't do that now. And so they're doing these experiences that you talked about, Thiago. They do that online, where they're actually having cooking classes, and you can buy a seat with these chefs and watch what they're doing, or join them, or follow along.
Yep.
I really want some picanha now. I'm just dying to have a nice picanha, and then dulce de leche for dessert. I'm all about it. All right. Yeah. Sorry for the food digression, Spencer. I'll get back to you to wrap us up here. The Team Performance Podcast.
Well, so the last thing I want to talk, we have so many things we could talk about, Thiago. I mean, gosh, you and I have talked a lot before, but I want to talk about leadership. You talked about the mental health issue and how leaders are handling that, how that's going to impact business going forward. What does leadership look like in the new normal? How are we going to keep teams together and cohesive? And what do we have to do as leaders to pivot to help our organizations succeed? You set it up perfectly, saying we don't know what the future is going to bring, but what do we got to do right now in our current situation to make sure that we're poised to handle, to be resilient to whatever could be coming next?
All right. Well, as you brilliantly reinforced, whoever says they know the next leadership model for 2021, they're either lying or they're 100% wrong. But we do have some things that we know are working at this moment, right? At the situation that we're at. I would say leadership looks like more tech and more human. What do I mean by that? In one hand, we have to fully embrace the remote work, the tech tools that we have, and extract the most productivity of this new type of work. Right? So we have to master it. How to lead people from afar without the tools that we used to use when we were, geographically close. So I think we have to master the technology, the channels, the ways of making work during isolation. In the other hand, I believe that leadership is also becoming more human, because finally we don't have to wear the superhero mask anymore. We can be humans. We can have anxiety. We can talk about it in a meeting. We can have, personal challenges at home. You can talk about your home chores with your colleague at work. You can recognize that this is taking a toll on all of us, and discuss it openly in a work meeting with your colleagues. You can extend an arm of support to both your team or your colleagues or your peers, trying to give them a hand on how to go through this process, these times. So I do believe leadership is going to become more human and more, I would say, relatable. Because we're now finally seeing that leaders are also humans. They have their own challenges. They question themselves, and they are as human as all of us. So I love that combination of the world is going more tech oriented, but by that we are becoming more and more, we need to become more human oriented. We need to reinforce what separates us from the machines.
I think that's a very fitting way to conclude our podcast. I like the idea of becoming simultaneously more technical and also more human. It doesn't work if you have just technical and you don't have the human aspect of it. I think the human aspect is absolutely critical. So Thiago, thank you so much. Now, if people want to learn more about the work that you're doing, Thiago, there in Curitiba, the various projects that you're involved in, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Guys, you can reach me at Instagram. I'm very present there. It's one of the social media that I kept my attention during these crazy times. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn, but I'd say if you want to give me a shout out and follow on the projects that I've been doing, I'd say Instagram is the best way. It's _ Ayres, so Oyres. And projects all over the world. We keep doing them, and I was very happy to talk with Spencer earlier on how also the business opportunities are coming back, and there's a lot of work to be done, and we'll be there for our customers and our partners. Right?
That's right. How about you, Spencer? What's the best way for people to connect with you?
So, I just want to say one last thing before I do that. First of all, thank you so much, Thiago, for coming. I loved your comments. And
my pleasure.
Just your insights are amazing. One of the things that I think is going to be a challenge for leadership, as we rely more on tech, there is a tendency to get lazy on the human side. And so it's actually going to cause us to be more vigilant, to have greater empathy. And I'm not talking about just understanding where people are coming from, but the empathy is the skills that can't be automated, which as we go more AI and more technology, the skills that can't be automated are the ones that are going to make you more valuable as a leader, as an employee, as anything that you do. But it's harder. The more we rely on tech, the harder it is for us to actually be human. And so we have to work at it harder. I love what you said, and I agree with you. We need both of those things, but it's going to be a challenge. You can catch me at Spencer at altiumleadership.com. That's ALTIUM leadership.com, or visit me on my website. You can chat me there. Look at that at altiumleadership.com. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Spencer. And I can be contacted at gp4.com. That's gpfour.com. Or you can reach me by email at cnapier@gp4.com. Thiago, once again, thank you so much for joining us. Listeners, please like and subscribe to our podcast, and we'll see you again next week.